I hear there's another Markley quiz, and we are ready. Bring it on.
All right, I will. Actually, this one probably is going to be somewhat simple. I don't know. Simple is probably a tough word because then if you get the question wrong, it makes you feel bad, right? But it's probably something you're probably fairly familiar with, and that's a two-question quiz regarding the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, which is the CVSS, which has gone through a couple iterations, versions 1, 2, and I think 3 is in somewhat use now. Maybe the new version's coming out soon. So in regards to the CVSS, so the first question is kind of one of those tricky ones because it's a not, which is not part of the core criteria for the CVSS. So I'm going to give you a choice of 4. The first one is exploitability. The second one is safety. Then report confidence. And then the last one is access vector. So these are things that may or may not be part of the computations to develop the vulnerability score.
Ken, of all those, safety doesn't sound like it fits.
Yeah, that one, and I'm pretty sure attack vector is on there. I don't know about access vector. So those are the definitely safety is the one that seems the most out of place.
Well, how would you even factor safe? Doesn't that sound like the opposite of what you would be measuring? Like exploitability sounds like it would drive the score up, but safety? Like I don't know. For me, that just seems weird. I'm thinking I'm gonna go with my gut on this one and say safety does not belong.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Matt.
See, I told you guys you'd nail these questions. That's perfectly right.
Awesome.
That's really good. Yeah, safety is certainly not something that you're not trying to develop an analysis of how safe something is based upon a vulnerability score. It really doesn't make sense.
All right.
So good. So the next one's probably even as easy, but it's one of those ones that people get wrong because they use CVSS scoring wrong. So here's the question.
All right.
The intent. So the intent of CVSS is, and here's your choices. So this is you need to tell me which one because only one of these is correct. So this is the intent. Objectifying severity, decision making, creating panic, or comparing vulnerabilities.
Creating panic sounds really good, but I have a feeling that one's not it.
Right. So when they say objectifying, I feel like that's maybe not the right way to use that word, but to make a vulnerability objective, as in not just a subjective judgment of how bad it is, like taking something and turning it into a number as opposed to a feeling. That sounds right, but comparing vulnerabilities is an interesting one too. I mean, you technically could do that now that you've got 2 different scores, but I don't know. Could you go through those categories one more time just so I make sure I haven't misheard one or missed one?
No problem, Matt. So objectifying severity, decision making, Ken's favorite, creating panic, and comparing vulnerabilities.
I'm kind of with you, Matt, where if we take the terminology objectifying severity seems a little off, but if I think about how I read that, it's almost you say, okay, I'm looking at the severity for what? Well, I'm probably trying to compare it to something else, so I'm leaning towards comparing vulnerabilities.
Okay. I'm going to go with objectifying.
Okay.
Actually, no, I take it back. No, the English major, not English major, but I used to edit newspapers. The proofreader in me is screaming that that's wrong. So I'm going to stick with you, Ken. I'm going to go with comparing vulnerabilities.
We'll see if you should have stuck with your gut or not.
Yeah.
You probably should have. But and objectifying is probably maybe not the best choice of word, and maybe that's what's throwing you off a little bit, because the whole thing CVSS, which is hard to say fast, CVSS is to create a non-subjective, mechanism for evaluating a vulnerability.
Okay.
The problem is that a lot of people do what you guys are thinking of, is you compare vulnerabilities. So, and that's not only that, but then decision making. So for example, if you had a Microsoft vulnerability that was scored at 2.5, and you had a Linux vulnerability scored a 3.0, which one is more, which one's more important to you?
Wow.
You really can't compare them unless you start thinking about what's my environment like, what's my, who is my user base. And so comparing vulnerabilities using a score like this was never the intent of CVSS, but a lot of people do it. They also try to make decisions based on CVSS, saying, for example, I know lots of companies do this. If I see a CVSS score of 9, I'm going to prioritize that as a patching. And the problem is that as a decision maker, over like one that scores a 4 or a 5, the challenge that happens when you do that decision making based upon CVSS is, again, you're not really recognizing your user base and your exposure sometimes to it. So if you're using this generic score, so Carnegie Mellon actually did a study. This is why I picked this. Carnegie Mellon did a study a couple years back about how we're using CVSS wrong. And what they've actually done in the last year is, GitHub right now, is they turned it around and they actually have something called SSVC, which is CVSS backwards.
Okay.
And that is for decision making. That's trying to help people with decisions.
What, inputs from your own environment? Because you can't just make the decision in a vacuum, right?
I know that one of the things that the CVSS score has been working on is also to help with the decision-making function is human safety issues, for example. And I hate to use the word safety because we used it earlier in the quiz and said it was wrong. But if something is related to a life or death situation, such that, hey, if this vulnerability got exploited, a breathing machine might stop. Or something like that. Those need to get bumped up in severity, right? Even though the vulnerability itself may not be a severe one. So I think some of the decision-making stuff is a challenge that people use for CVSS, and and how they use it, and then they really shouldn't, because again, it's not intended for that. But so that's why I kind of wanted to spark the conversation with this quiz.